Hi, I'm Russell Ashworth, Vice President of the Board, and I'm here to introduce our new editor for creative nonfiction, Mary Day Long. Mary Day is a voracious reader, an avid traveler, and a passionate observer of the human spectacle. She is drawn to diverse and inventive nonfiction narratives. Reaching across borders, disciplines, and genres is more important than ever in our fragmented world. So she looks to discover and promote writing that, by honoring the individual voice, renders it universal. Educated as an artist at the University of Texas at Austin, Long, after exhibiting paintings and photographs in Texas and California, has become increasingly engaged with words. She has worked as a technical and nonfiction editor, travel writer, and photographer, and website designer. Her current projects include a photographic survey of the Buddhist temples of Bagan, Myanmar. A longtime member and volunteer for the Writers League of Texas and the North Austin Photographic Society, she shares her home in Austin with 3 spoiled cats and 1 spoiled human male. Sounds a lot like my home.
I'm very glad to be here. I'm very glad to be a part of Ocotillo Review, which is having a very exciting time. I think Tony may have told some of you that the issue is sold out, which is very cool. Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about creative nonfiction right now, and that is exactly what it sounds like. It's based on personal experience. It's based on real stuff, personal experiences, personal reflections, but it takes all of these true things and wraps it all up in the personal voice and the personal Weltanschauung, let's go with that again, I like that word, of the writer. And we were lucky this time in having a lot of good entries for creative nonfiction. But that led to some really hard choices. But when you combine very strong writing with an obscure bit of American history and the Broadway musical and the weird stuff that goes on in the collectibles market and a loving remembrance of what sounds like a fascinating person and a great mom, the choice in choosing what you're about to hear became really easy. Wendy Goodman is an attorney. She's returning to creative writing after 20 years of legal writing. Her first piece was published in Hevria magazine in August, and we're pleased to publish her second piece and hope to see a lot more from her. She lives outside Washington, D.C., in Kensington, Maryland, with her husband and 2 teenagers, and she flew to Austin just to read for us and to get away from the snow, evidently. I promised her we wouldn't have any. So let's welcome Wendy Goodman. She's reading the Reynolds pamphlet.
Hi, I'm Wendy. Thanks for coming and letting me read to you. This is my first time in print, so I'm beyond thrilled, excited, and honored. And I'm going to try really hard not to cry. The estate sale complete, the Holy Red Prius sold, donations packed up and carted out. A cherished last 4 months the 5 of us shared in our mother's home of 26 years in Princeton, New Jersey, cleaning out cabinets and picking through closets, each of us claiming our favorite things. The West Wing Collector's Edition DVD set, the metal Don Quixote sculpture, a miniature marble Michelangelo Moses, audio cassette recordings of the Mary Tyler Moore Show made by hand from rerun broadcasts at 1 a.m. The empty White House glistened, the sun pouring in the full-length windows, the light bouncing off the bare walls, still smelling of her sweet perfume, a combination of Elizabeth Arden's The Red Door and Lancôme's Magie Noire. It seemed impossible she wasn't there. On the day of the final walkthrough, the floor-to-ceiling bookcases stood vacant and void. It was there, in that empty space, that it revealed itself for the first time. Nearly left behind with the paper recycling, its stained, aged white pages blending into the stained, aged white shelf, was the first edition Reynolds pamphlet. In 1797, Alexander Hamilton publicly admitted to having had an extramarital affair with Maria Reynolds while Secretary of the Treasury. He made this revelation to refute charges of financial impropriety made against him by his political enemies. He wasn't siphoning money off the government coffers, Hamilton explained. He was being blackmailed by Maria Reynolds' husband, James Reynolds. This effort at clearing his name is known as the Reynolds pamphlet. Hamilton's family attempted to find and destroy as many copies as possible, but a few first editions got away, and my mother had one. At 19, my mother left St. Louis and Washington University after her freshman year, returning home to New Jersey, where she married her high school sweetheart and raised 5 children. 25 years later, when I, the youngest of her children, started nursery school, she started accumulating college credits at nearby Kane College. When I started first grade, she enrolled full-time at Columbia University. Most days of the week, she drove an hour each way from Cranford, New Jersey to Upper Manhattan. There was a train, there was a bus. Instead, my mother traversed the span of the George Washington Bridge in her burnt orange Opel with manual transmission, barking hourly on the metered streets of New York City. She drove because time was limited. She drove because she needed to come and go as she pleased. She drove because those precious hours alone in her car were the closest she'd come to a meditation practice. Listening to Broadway musical soundtracks, audio recordings she made of her Columbia classes, and those homemade Mary Tyler Moore Show cassette tapes. She dove headfirst into all things academic, a declared history major. Passionate about politics, she called early American intellectual history her home. She started to assemble a small collection of rare books purchased in the many used bookstores that line the city streets near Columbia in the 1970s. The brittle bindings became fixtures on her bookshelves. First edition letters, writings, biographies. It was here, pressed between the leather-bound editions, that the 95-page Reynolds pamphlet was preserved. Why, we wondered, would our mother have a first edition Reynolds pamphlet? Time was not something she had in abundance, but what she lacked in time, she made up for with money. Both her parents had died in the years prior to her return to college. Her father, who made his fortune as a fur buyer at the May Company, left my mother a sizable inheritance. This money was how she put herself through Columbia, then Rutgers Law School. This money was how, after 25 years of being a housewife, she was able to leave an unhappy marriage and begin her second act, with me, the last of her 5 children, living at home in tow. We imagined she had to write a paper on Alexander Hamilton. With an elementary school-age child at home, she didn't have the luxury to stay late or arrive early or spend a Saturday in Columbia's sprawling archives. Instead, because she had the means, my mother extravagantly spent probably $250 on an original Hamilton writing dug up at one of her rare bookstores. She could use it as a primary source to write a term paper from home while half watching 8 is Enough with 7-year-old me. The imaginary term paper complete, the rare historical document would be given safe harbor on her bookshelf, cradled between its collectible comrades. It would make one big move from Cranford to Princeton, along with my mother and me in 1986, and there it remained. Jim, my history professor brother, with his rare book dealer and collector connections, eventually had the books and the pamphlet appraised. We would consider selling, or better yet, donating to a library in her name. Until then, Jim stowed them away. In May 2013, a casual exchange with one such rare book dealer suggested her Reynolds pamphlet was worth roughly $800. Enter stage left, Lin-Manuel Miranda. As the story goes, American composer, lyricist, playwright, singer, and actor Lin-Manuel Miranda, while on vacation in 2008, read Hamilton, the popular biography of Alexander Hamilton, written by Ron Chernow. Inspired, Miranda wrote the song Alexander Hamilton, which the following year he performed to a standing ovation at a spoken word event at the Obama White House. Due to ever-increasing buzz, Hamilton, an American musical, opened off-Broadway in early 2015 to overwhelming interest. 6 months later, Hamilton made its Broadway debut. In another 6 months, the hip-hop musical album won a Grammy Award, followed by the Pulitzer Prize for Drama and 11 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. Demand far outpaced supply, breaking records in ticket sales and prices. With that, Alexander Hamilton was transformed from founding father with the least star power to hip-hop Broadway musical legend. The Reynolds pamphlet, the title of an obscure historical document, emerged as the title of a song off a Grammy Award-winning album, and the content of the document, the song's story. That Reynolds pamphlet, have you read this? Alexander Hamilton had a torrid affair and he wrote it down right here. Money bought my mother time. It bought her freedom and the possibility of a new life. Money also bought my mother Broadway. In her eyes, there was but one city in the world, New York City, and the only theater scene that mattered was there. She saw everything. And if she fell madly in love with Kevin Kline in Pirates of Penzance or Jim Dale in Barnum, she saw it 3 times. Theater of every kind, but especially a grand Broadway musical, was one of her greatest loves. It was 2016 when historian colleagues began to whisper in Jim's ear about taking the Reynolds pamphlet to get appraised, this time at Sotheby's. Strike while the Broadway musical iron is hot, they said. 1 year later, we sold my mother's first edition Reynolds pamphlet at auction for $50,000.
Wow.
It has been 6 years since my mother died peacefully in her home at the age of 80, surrounded by her 5 children, 2 rooms away from her floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. I hope she knows the retirement papers she begrudgingly filed a month earlier were never processed. I hope she knows my father is buried next to her. I hope she knows about this moment in time in which her odd circumstances, a 45-year-old mother of 5, returning to college, determined to become a lawyer, her odd ways, buying an old pamphlet on the 1970s streets of Morningside Heights, and her passion for American history, the founders, politics, and the Broadway musical all magically intersected. She would have been thrilled to be in the audience at Sotheby's, watching her first edition Reynolds pamphlet sell for more than any other item at auction on that particular day. Yet, without a moment's hesitation, she would have taken her little windfall, bought back her pamphlet, likely paying more for it, driven home across the Hudson River in her red Prius, singing along with the Hamilton soundtrack. I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot, and promptly returned it to its place on her bookshelf.